Hello, all you dreamers, optimists, and junior tomorrownauts. Welcome back to the Tomorrowland Times podcast, the unofficial home for fan of Disney's 2015 Tomorrowland movie, its prequel novel, Before Tomorrowland, and the alternate reality game that introduced us to its fictional universe all the way back in 2013, The Optimist. I'm Hastin.
And I'm Nick. Today we're continuing our limited series on the show, the Before Tomorrowland Book Club, celebrating the 10th anniversary of the prequel novel written by Jeff Jensen and Jonathan Case. Now, last week we covered part 2, the middle, but here we are already. Time to enter the home stretch and dive into the book's thrilling finale, part 3, chapters 21 through 34. Now, Hastin, part 3, July 4th, 1939.
America's birthday. Here we are.
The beginning of America, the end of Before Tomorrowland. Chapter 21, in which Amelia Earhart gives good news and bad news. Amelia arrives at the World's Fair wire transfer station and anxiously awaits the arrival of Plus Ultra leadership. Clara wanders in, pretending to be lost as she explores the base. Amelia explains the wire transfer to her and its role in transporting guests to a hangar on Long Island as part of the reveal. But that's all in question now. Clara asks Amelia if Plus Ultra has a cure for cancer already, and Amelia just shakes her head. To cut the tension, Clara asks Amelia if Plus Ultra will replace her damaged leather jacket, and Amelia responds that scientists don't care too much about new clothes, and that it was ultimately a good luck charm for her over the years. Clara learns that the reveal was also intended to be Amelia's big return to the world. No more secrets. Just as Lee finds them, they are joined by Einstein, Leo, and H.G. Wells, who lets out a massive burp.
Excuse me.
Tesla greets his fellows and invites the Brackets to join their meeting. Tesla begins by outlining the history of the debate between keeping their secrets and revealing them to the world. He's always wanted to help the world despite their restrictive charter, but votes to delay until the threat against them is neutralized. Leo agrees, invoking Hitler. Einstein pushes back, saying that they are no better if they continue to hoard their resources for themselves. Wells defends their New World Order, a phrase which tempts Einstein to have Amelia punch him in the gut. Hughes votes to continue, of course, for the financial opportunity. And Amelia originally votes with Tesla out of loyalty, but after an impassioned speech from Clara regarding her lesson in not waiting to do the things you dream of doing, Earhart changes her vote, and Tesla is proud of her for standing up for her own viewpoint. The remaining voices spiral off into a vicious debate in a babble of babble, invoking the old Tower of Babel there, getting a little biblical at the end of this chapter. Hastin, what'd you think of the very consequential chapter 21?
There's an interesting debate that sort of goes on here where this is a bit of the same challenge that we saw in the film in regards to the reveal. It didn't happen. Things are going sideways. There's no real plan. I found it interesting that leaders and second tier leaders in Plus Ultra consisted of 46 people that's referenced in the chapter. And you can just imagine that from an overall story perspective, this is a huge mess trying to figure out the state that they're sort of in with the whole Henry problem.
Yeah, and you've got just the key members who are able to transport in, but then they yell at H.G. Wells because he overloads the circuits, and now all the secondary members have to virtually, basically Zoom conference in from their MFDs across the world. And so it's just an absolute chaos. But I like that you pointed out a little bit of the Plus Ultra lore we get here, because Amelia gives us another little one as well. When she was talking about being on the other side, she tells Clara some of what she was doing over there was checking on the old labs from back in the heyday of Plus Ultra. I just love thinking about Tomorrowland being speckled with these iterations of them trying to establish bases over there, building bigger and better stuff. And while she was there, she had really nothing better to do until Tesla rescued her than to check out all the old infrastructure from before she was a Plus Ultra member. I thought that was a fun little window. And you could just imagine, a whole comic book series existing within that one little period of time. It's so much fun. Now, we've also got some chapter art by Jonathan Case on this one. And it looks quite like the picture you have gracing us behind you today. You're recording live from the 1939 World's Fairgrounds, and it's just this great portrait of the Trilon and Perisphere and the surrounding environs. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about some of the stylistic choices that Jonathan Case has made with all of these illustrations. I just love that none of them are quite boxed in. It's not like they're a picture drawn in a frame. He always uses this kind of billowy cloud shape to sort of isolate, so the pictures are just kind of floating there. It almost makes me feel like every single graphic in this book would make a great t-shirt because it's not boxed in. It's got its
Yeah.
own sort of border that is generally justified within the contents of the image. Just really tastefully done, and has always been something that's felt great to me about these illustrations.
There's also an angle here too where you've got Clara wants it open because she's wants to see it and
Yeah.
she's going to die. Like,
Yeah.
let's be honest, right? And I think that there's this element of like convincing Amelia that you wants it open because she wants to enjoy whatever, it gives to her as well. And so reveal or not reveal or whatever else, it's very important to her. And I feel like there is this, again, not to create this sort of like connection to what we sort of experienced, but I feel that same sort of thing of like evangelicalizing the film when it came out, even at a time when like it came out, it didn't do super great. It didn't do, well in the box office. People struggled with its idea and its concept. And we were just kind of there like, no, this is more. There's an overall neat story here and trying to get people to interested with and engage with it because we were kind of pulled forward. And so that happened to the brackets too. They were pulled forward. And so it was like, no, we want everyone to see this and enjoy this and know what it is. And so again, it's one of those chapters where I kind of felt it on the other side of the book a little bit too.
Yeah. And also, you make a great point in terms of Clara representing not only the audience, but the normal person. She's the only, for better or worse, the only person who made it through the gauntlet that was supposed to happen with the reveal. And therefore, the only person in that meeting, along with her son, of course, that is not plus ultra. So when they're having this final vote, having someone there to say, you're all voting from a place of the inside. This is the only voice coming in from the outside and saying, are you at least curious what the people would think? Look, you were supposed to have a lot more people than just Clara, but she is the one here. And honestly, kind of the perfect example of the recruits that they were looking for. So having someone there to voice it and then to dramatically, I'm talking in terms of authorship here, show her change a vote of one of the members, I just think is a great bit of drama and should be very valuable to the Plus Ultra members who ostensibly are arguing for people like Clara in whatever direction they think they're arguing them for. So yeah, just a great little turn of drama in this particular chapter. And it's not all serious though. And some of that not seriousness comes in through H.G. Wells, who I love is depicted here as just this absolute buffoon who's like he tries to make this impassioned statement and he belches a second time. Like he just keeps burping. And I love the line where someone's talking about like, what are you digesting at 1 o'clock in the morning? Like,
well, maybe now maybe he had to drink a sweet drink after going through the wire station, because remember,
sure.
I saw this burping as also a kind of a like in the movie, remember?
Oh, you mean like he preloaded it? Because now Casey drinks her Coke at the other side.
Right.
You're saying
right.
he preloaded, like maybe he just chugged a couple of Coca-Colas.
Yeah. This was before they invented the powder.
What is that?
Powder. Your headcanon, I fully accept it now. That's the story. But some other details included about H.G. Wells here bring us into everyone's favorite fact versus fiction.
And how would you convince them? Data? Facts? Good luck.
There's a couple comments here that are references to real world things. He uses the phrase, the shape of things to come, and that is the title of his 1933 novel, his sci-fi novel. So it's directly kind of referencing the real H.G. Wells. Also, I remember that one of the other members makes an offhanded comment once Clara and therefore Amelia make her vote. They offhandedly say, see, women should vote, which is a direct reference. They direct that towards H.G. Wells because in the real world, H.G. Wells was a vocal supporter of women's suffrage. And so getting a little bit of those dynamics, because you got to think, we probably don't have a historical record of what every fictional member of Plus Ultra here represented, thought about suffrage. But when we do have a little historical nugget like that, it's just great to throw that in here. I absolutely love that. We do have a few little changes here from the earlier versions. Amelia just gives a little bit more explanation when she's talking to Clara. The particle beam doesn't exist. It's something of a private, slightly painful joke between Tesla and I. Remind me to tell you about Operation Death Ray someday. Anyway, the technique we were testing was called the running start. I was using a new ship. You know our mutual friend Henry. His dad was one of the mechanics who helped build it. I named it the Madame Curie. She was one of them? She was. Great lady. Gave a lot to Plus Ultra. Suffered for it, too. So, interestingly, we had in an earlier episode speculated that one of the robots at the exhibit named Marie might have been after Marie Curie. And this little deleted bit about the ship maybe implies that it could have been. In the internal moment when Amelia is reconsidering her vote and thinking about Tesla and her sort of obligation to him, he stopped at nothing to save her life when it had been lost. The part of the story she didn't tell Clara was that Tesla didn't build the grid for Plus Ultra. He built it to find her. He even sold Hughes a portfolio of patents to priceless Plus Ultra inventions to finance its tremendous cost. Now, Hastin, here I think we have the nugget origin of something we've been talking about over the last few episodes, which is, why did Nick ship Tesla and Amelia so hard over the years? And the answer is absolutely, I read this earlier version of the book first, and each episode we've discussed, there are these little tiny sentences that paint a much bigger picture. And that's not to say that they're not talking about something more between them, because there actually is language, either in this chapter or one of the next ones, where Amelia says, he was this to me and this to me, and something more. It's much more subtle in the final book, but you just have a couple of character details in the original version that kind of de-emphasized the frailty of his age. I always originally assumed it was because Tesla was drinking his milkshake just like Nick would drink his milkshake in the movie, and he was just still pretty young looking.
Age becomes you.
Thanks. You should try it.
I don't know. I think I'll just keep drinking my shake every morning. Comes in chocolate now.
Yum.
But now in the final version, we do have a slightly more frail. And I do think dramatically with Lee and Clara, it is more valuable to have a parallel for Lee caring for Clara with Amelia caring for Tesla. And those will come out throughout these chapters as we go through. Now, chapter 22 and chapter 23 are very linked in terms of continuous action. So we're going to go ahead and summarize those together, and then we'll talk about them both. Chapter 22, in which Lee and Clara continue their tour with an old friend, the World's Fair. Lee and Clara argue after she had revealed personal information about not being able to afford her medication anymore, which she had kept from Lee but freely shared with Plus Ultra. Lee doesn't want to upset his mother, so he bottles his anger and they make up. He tells her she was good in there. Walking back to their sleeping quarters, they pass the Faustus charging bay. They enter their room but can't find the light switch. Clara screams. Henry flips the lights on, holding Clara. He forces them back to the wire transfer room and for Clara to put on her glasses. On their way, Lee sees Henry place his homemade bomb behind the charging Faustus units. As they are transported, they hear the explosion just outside the sealed pod. They materialize in a flat, rocky field. Wardenclyffe. Curiously, something about the smell and feel of the earth made Lee think of baseball. At the tower, they find a puzzle of numbered bricks. Henry threatens them and all the sleeping humans in his blast radius to use the glasses to solve it. Clara stands up to Henry, making it clear that there was to be no harm to her son or she'd snap the glasses in two. That leads directly into chapter 23, in which Henry sees the truth about Clara. Henry recognizes the numbers from the tiles as the same string spouted by the Faustus he destroyed at the World's Fair. But what was it? After a few failed attempts, Henry lets out a frustrated laser blast. He scans the two of them and spots Clara's cancer, realizing her situation at last. Lee has a moment of inspiration and tries the puzzle again. It works. The solution? The opening day batting order for the Yankees. Orson's voice greets them as the tiles form a stairwell underground, and they descend. Hastin. Chapter 22, chapter 23. We've got an actual puzzle being solved here.
I love using the wire transfer as like they escaped before the bomb went off.
So cool.
With all the Faustus units.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to have a couple of those throughout this idea of a portal or a transfer closing up right before a big explosion. It feels like a classic, dare I say, cinematic moment in the action here.
This puzzle sucks, though.
You're absolutely right. And we're going to bring that into not quite a historical based one, but a very brief fact versus fiction.
Facts.
And the fact versus fiction, the fiction of this puzzle is it's great. The fact is this puzzle sucks. Now, that being said, we're going to get a little more on the puzzle from a deleted scene in a later chapter, but we're going to wait to talk about that. But as is, as someone who has occasionally designed puzzles professionally, I'm going to say this is one of my least favorite type of puzzles, which is, guess what I'm thinking? Because other than something vaguely makes him think of baseball and they're like surrounded by a chain link fence or whatever, it just doesn't feel like this puzzle is clued very well, right? It's like, here's a bunch of numbers. What numbers from other places could you pull to put these numbers in the right way? There was no clever bit of like correlation between the setup. It was just this vague sense of who he was and catering to him specifically, but we'll get into
they could have done a throwback to the baseball, the baseball machine that he was playing with and be like, oh, I'm number, blah, blah, blah on the Yankees, right? Like they could have added some sort of like, connective tissue to the other baseball stuff that has happened instead of just like, oh, Lee knows this and he knows what these numbers are. He figures it out.
I will say I am delighted, absolutely delighted, that it has taken us this far into our episode on the final chapter. I believe this is the first piece of criticism we have levied at this book, which is in itself a huge compliment, because I don't think most people expect authors to be very good at designing puzzles. Usually though, they just write their way around them. Like they'll describe that the puzzle was solved rather than describing step by step, attempt after attempt after attempt, like we get here. So I absolutely love the ambition and the commitment. In the same way I love that most recent Batman movie. Batman actually solves a puzzle live on screen, step by step. Huge props for the ambition, but the actual puzzle itself, and I guess in fiction, we can say it stinks because it was a last-minute adaptation, which we will get to.
Well, we got to talk about the amazing Jonathan Case art that's in this chapter.
Chapter 22, we've got Jonathan Case art that I almost missed. Hastin, talk us through this here.
I love this art. You've got Clara laying on the ground. You've got Henry in a chokehold with Lee holding the glasses with the Wardenclyffe Tower, extremely like over and behind them with a big bright moon in the background. And again, that sort of, like you said, this cloud puffy design that gives it this very like, shape. And I really like the close in detail on the characters and what we get out of them and the facial expressions. This idea too, of when I read the book, I don't see Henry as looking like an adult. I see him like, oh, he's like an 11-year-old in like a robot body or something.
Because we're here. We're in his mind. Yeah.
And so the artwork reminding me of like, no, he has matured. He does look older physically on the outside because of this robotic body. It's a good reminder, and I love this art for it. And this is a great, maybe my favorite piece in the whole book.
Yeah, no.
I really like this one.
Up to this point, I have to agree with you. This is an amazingly dynamic piece. And I'm so sad I almost skipped it, because what I'm realizing now, perhaps our first and only look at Henry.
Yeah.
You realize we get so few of these chapter illustrations. Not every character or object or location actually gets depicted. So being able to see Henry at this most important moment, I think, is a great choice. And one of those things I think would be great for us to discuss in one of our later episodes as we look back on the book as a whole, which things were not illustrated and which things are still yet to be imagined by the fans. I'll put an earmark in that for us to tackle that as we look back at the epilogue next episode. Okay, chapter 24, in which Rotwang takes advantage of his new friends, New York City. Rotwang, Duquesne, and his men arrive at his townhome where Loman is staying. He asks Rotwang for a report on the HS-1. Rotwang begins to spin a yarn that the HS-1 was here, today, in this penthouse. He describes how the HS-1 found this place and tells Loman that the HS-1 had killed him and his men. 5 gunshots then ring out, and Loman's men fall dead, killed by their female escorts. Duquesne raises his own gun to Loman, and Rotwang tells him how he gave his last orders and charge of the submarine. And then you died. Betrayal, end of chapter. I really like this chapter. Very short, very sweet, very spy movie thriller, double cross, and just the drama and imagination of, I'm going to come here and, oh, you want me to give you a report? I'm going to give you the report that everyone's going to believe because I'm taking control now. Just really fun villain on villain dynamics in this chapter.
And very clearly, like, I do not care about the Nazis, and I do not care about, what, the whole German angle is, and I do not care about that. I care about getting Henry back for myself.
Yeah. And he just so happens to have this rapscallion who he was in Duquesne. He was able to convince him that, look, you weren't really in this. Because if you remember in part 2, the chapter we kind of left them off on, he asks him, how much do you really enjoy being a Nazi? It's like, look, I think you're in this for yourself. Go with me instead of them. You'll still be in it for yourself. That kind of off-screen seduction would have been interesting to see, perhaps in some other media as well. But just leads up to a very fun sort of twisty-turny dynamic, and ultimately a great way to take Loman off the board. This really ushers us in, I feel like, we're in part 3 now. We're starting to take these villains that were here the whole time. Oh, that's the end of Loman. We're really narrowing it down to Rotwang and the people that are central to the drama. Great stuff. Great stuff.
Let's move on to the next chapter.
Chapter 25, in which Amelia Earhart finds herself in a tight spot. The World's Fair. Amelia awakens surrounded by rubble after the explosion. She hears the other founders arguing about the attack, but can't find the brackets or the Faustus units. Half of their New York stock had been obliterated. Heading to the sleeping quarters, the room collapses on her and she's rescued by a trio of surviving Faustuses. Amelia scrubs the security footage and sees Henry take Clara and Lee to the transfer station and escape before the blast. The Plus Ultra leaders board their Zeppelin and leave behind their crumbling base. Looking down, Tesla surveys the sinkholes across the fairgrounds and sees Faustus units scrambling to repair before the fair opens in mere hours. They check the video feed from Clara's glasses. They're already on the train. This leads us, Hastin, right into the chapter art, because that last bit of Tesla looking over the grounds and the city behind him, that is the art. And it's just this great shot. Maybe one of the great illustrations of Tesla we have in here. He's on the deck of the Zeppelin. He's got some kind of radio in his hand.
I assume that's his MFD.
Do you think it is, though?
Maybe not.
The way it's described is not the way it appears in the picture. That's what made me think. Because remember, he tosses his MFD to Amelia. Do you remember? Does she give it back to him?
I don't think that's called out. But this is a great shot with, the Chrysler building and
yeah, he's holding some kind of a device that actually has an antenna and a little bit of a beacon of some kind on the top. So here's the description in the last part of that. The wind blew Tesla's hair around his high, gaunt cheekbones. He held the MFD out to her, and the video feed she saw wasn't from the fairground base, it was from beneath Wardenclyffe. So I think you're right. I think this is supposed to be the MFD. Maybe despite no description of an antenna, maybe the MFDs have an antenna. I just vividly remember them being described as a compact that opens up, but maybe like the modern day hinged phones, maybe you can flip it all the way around and it's just the screen on one side, We focus on this too much, but it's really because I would like an MFD.
yes.
Make it look kind of like the pin cases in the movie where it has the Plus Ultra logo sort of inset engraved into the outer shell. That would just be so much fun. There were a few fun quotes I called out in this chapter, though. I love after Amelia slugs Hughes. Do you remember what she says?
Oh, say anything else and I'll find a special place for that fork you use to eat peas. I love that. Nice throwback.
As we previously discussed, real fork. This is a real threat from a real fork.
I also love this quote by Tesla at the very end of the chapter when it's an incredible thing to have spent your life building a dream for mankind than to have it snuffed out before men can even dream it.
Wonderful. It definitely, to me, it echoes to the lyrics of Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow.
Man has a dream, and that's the start. He follows his dream with mind and heart.
I feel like we're swimming in those same lyrical waters here with that. It's just nice. There's each chapter where we don't get a ton of time with the higher ups at Plus Ultra in this book, but whenever we do, they give us these little nuggets that are almost mythic and memorable to sort of characterize their perspective on the thing and where they are at in the story. And this moment from Tesla absolutely jumped out. Speaking of jumping, chapter 26, in which Lee meets Faustus again, Long Island. Lee, Clara, and Henry ride a train car filled with plus ultra propaganda. They arrive, entering a large empty hall with fanfare. Perched on a stage, a Faustus unit, this time gold instead of silver. He welcomes the Brackets and their unknown guest, asking if they have any questions for him. Henry asks for everything he knows about the grid. Faustus explains how the grid allows transport to the other world in a way less destructive than previous methods prohibited by their charter to do more harm than good. Henry asks how he fits into that idea, and the Faustus searches his name, Henry Stevens. Faustus explains that the young boy, Henry Stevens, was killed in an unfortunate accident, but that nobody was aware until now that Rotwang had transferred his consciousness. Faustus apologizes to Henry, explains that Amelia searched for Rotwang for 6 months in an attempt to bring him to justice, that if they had found Henry alive, they would have not captured him, but offered him a home. And then the Faustus unit says to Henry, "May I offer that to you now?" Henry rejects Faustus's offer with a punch. Lee and Clara attempt to escape back to the subway, but they find themselves in an isolated concrete room. Henry rips his way through the doors to them, and the ceiling begins to press down toward them, and they brace for the worst. But the ceiling slid away, and they were in an elevator going up, and they emerge in a giant hangar cavern. Henry tells Lee that Plus Ultra can't cure Clara's cancer, but Lee summons a surprising turn of optimism and replies, "They will. Someday they will." Clara decides to comfort Henry and tell him he can't destroy every machine in the world. Someone will always rebuild, whether it's men like Tesla or Henry's own father. That he can't go on like this. Henry says she's wrong about him and about Plus Ultra. Time to end this. Hastin, this is a consequential chapter, and I'm not going to lie. Up to this point, I don't remember my first read load these 10 years ago, but this moment between the Faustus unit and Henry made me cry.
It's so emotional, and it's so raw, and it's so, it reminds me of the moment when Frank is holding Athena in a way.
Yes, very much.
The two mechanical devices coming together to know that there was an injustice and that what happened to Henry was wrong, and it being such a core to the fundamental beliefs of everyone involved with Plus Ultra that, like, it's built into Faustus's programming that he knows it was wrong, and he knows what happened to him was wrong, and he feels bad. The robot feels bad that they could not give Henry a home.
You're so right. And that's part of the depth of this, especially when you take it in concert with the movie. You calling out Athena is absolutely right. In the same way we previously talked about sort of the surface level connection between Faustus and Athena, they're both recruiter robots. On a storytelling subtextual level, they represent the intentions of Plus Ultra at the moment, sort of isolated and free from human error. So the part of that emotion that we're talking about comes from just what you said. That Faustus unit is expressing the pure intent of Plus Ultra, and it is a good intent. We have this ongoing debate about Plus Ultra. Did they do right? Did they do wrong? It's full of very flawed, mostly men, let's be honest. But in this moment, you have the robots that can be allowed to inhabit their intentions purely outside of their frailties. And to have that expressed so beautifully in the film through Athena in multiple ways, and now through Faustus in a way that will transfer over to Henry in future chapters, it just made me very emotional. And this idea of, I see your pain, you're right, you were wronged, but we honestly didn't know. And I don't necessarily think that Henry pushing him and punching him to shut him up, I think it's sensory overload. I don't necessarily think that's him refuting it, because as we see, it just takes him a while to fully process the kindness of that in concert with the kindness that Clara has shown him. Between the Faustus and Clara sort of offering this nurturing cocoon for Henry towards the final movements of the story. I mean, we know we're in final movements of the story, not only when we see moments like that happen, but then when we see Lee, kind of depicted as the jaded, even in the text of the story, she calls him a cynic at times, saying the most optimistic thing possible, which is he has been critical plus ultra, but he musters enough to say, I actually believe they could cure my mom one day. That plus ultra in this limited window of time has given him the hope to believe that there actually might be a cure. That's pretty consequential on a character level. And it's just, these are the satisfying things about existing in the third act of a story. We're seeing the conclusion of these character journeys. Because when it comes to a villain or someone who's on the jaded side of things, sometimes the story can give them an about face and they can turn that and the drama is about their change. But sometimes it's not. I can almost imagine that other earlier versions of this story might not have necessarily had the Henry beat land this hard. So it's just really great to see these characters do that. And on a slightly more shallow level, you and I love the plus ultra lore. And I just love this little name drop of, from the Faustus, the Einstein-Tesla Impact Imbalance Act. The idea that this was sort of their quasi version of, the Prime Directive and the Federation. But the idea of, we have been ripping holes in the universe and in the fabric of reality. We need to have something built into our charter that says we should always aim to do more good than bad, that our harm should be absolutely outbalanced by the good that we're doing. And if not, we shouldn't be doing it. I just thought that was a really interesting mention.
Lee providing that sort of flicker of hope for plus ultra, which is something that sort of happens continuously in this last part of the book. You just sort of see this, you see Clara inspiring Amelia, you see Lee inspired by the message and what it means, and this, and how, the Faustus plays out with Henry. It's just, again, that kind of not hitting you over the head with optimism, but understanding that optimism is seeing the long run as being a good thing, even if the moment really sucks right now. There's an element of that perspective that I think is very hard. It was hard 10 years ago. I think it's harder now to have that sort of understanding that the positivity and the optimism are in the individual moments, not in the grand scheme of things. It's how we look out for each other. It's how we try to right our wrongs that we've done in the past. It's how we understand, what our sort of core programming and our sort of core beliefs are. And so I love that this last part just kind of has this constant repeating message of even if things are literally going south and everything else, it's there's a little bit of that understanding that no, we should continue to press forward with this. It is still important.
And to see struggles that the characters are having with that internally. We have a few little deleted passages here that I think speak to that from this chapter. Was Lee ready for the future? He didn't know. Plus Ultra had an extraordinary vision for mankind, yet one that seemed capable and even likely to produce egregious abuses and living nightmares like the Man-Thing sitting next to him. He didn't know. He just didn't know. So that's right before the moment we've been talking about. They're really, in this early version, trying to tee that up. Also, when Lee asks Faustus, we get a little specific payoff on the puzzle here. In the earlier version, Lee just directly asks Faustus, why the Yankee numbers for the puzzle at Wardenclyffe? And he answers, the puzzle was supposed to be the same for all participants, but it was changed 2 days ago by one of the recruiting robots in the field after meeting you. You must have made quite an impression on him. Interesting, but also opens up this can of worms of wow, they've really given the Faustus units a lot of oversight of this process. The idea that a human plus ultra member wouldn't necessarily have to approve a change of that size. That being said, this is a tertiary canon in terms of it's not in the final version of the book. It's just a fun little detail. Going along with fun little details, there's another moment that was truncated in the final book, but we get a little extra in the middle here. And it's from Henry talking about plus ultra. Nothing good has come from their striving. It has only produced failure or discord or degradation or exploitation or greed or mistakes begetting more mistakes or worse. I'm proof of that. That's fun. I mean, the shorter version of that line that just has the beginning and end tells the story just as well. But it's fun to have these little deleted passages just for the text of voicing some of the criticisms that, might be natural to think about an organization that has had this many mess ups over the years. Which moves us even deeper into the story with chapter 27, in which Henry regrets his big mouth. Henry stands alongside a fleet of plus ultra planes his father had helped create. He overlooks the ocean under which lives the grid. He formulates a plan: steal a plane, fly to the end of the grid, bail into the water, and tear the thing apart with his robotic strength. But Clara's words haunted him. The memory of his father, who gave his life to plus ultra, haunted him. Before he can enact this plan, the Nazi death squad arrives, suited up in 7 of Rotwang's apocalypse jumpers from the beginning of the book. He tried to assume a combat stance, but Henry found that he couldn't move any part of himself. As a dozen experimental German Luftwaffe aircraft land at the hangar, Rotwang steps out of his metal shell to approach Henry. He places a trident on Henry's chest to extract the power source that was his heart. As his consciousness fades out, he sees one of the apocalypse jumpers approach him and activate its flamethrower. He sees the flame engulf him and his flesh melt off of his metal body. The last thing he hears is a woman's voice crying. Ooh, a little bit of a cliffhanger, dramatic cliffhanger here from Henry's point of view, as this is presumably his death. Or is it? Before we move on to that, Hastin, should we start off for this one with some fact versus fiction?
Facts. Good luck.
Absolutely.
What do we got? What's real? I don't know what's real, Hastin. Tell me what's real.
The experimental Luftwaffe. Luftwaffe?
It is a real thing. Interestingly, though, we've got this theme with Before Tomorrowland where they take the real number and they just move it. Just one, 10th value. So it's the Dornier Du 335, but the book says it's the 325. Just like back at the hotel room, the real hotel room was 33 something, and the one in the book was 32. They're just twisting it a little bit to show this is an alternate world. This is our own story. But yeah, you look up these. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, but the Dornier Du 325. It looks like a Nazi plane that you would recognize, but obviously this book takes place in the early days of all that. And by saying experimental, I think that's generally the sci-fi author's way of saying, yeah, it's a little early, but it's here, okay?
I like the lore of the exact, 48 crisscrossing electrical lines out in the ocean. I think reading this, you're in Henry's brain dealing with the push and the pull of what happened last chapter, understanding plus ultra, understanding where he's standing, understanding that he has ruined this reveal, this difficulty of, here's the guy who raised him, stealing his heart from him. That it's very clear in this chapter that Rotwang was in it for himself. He did not greatly represent plus ultra and its goals, its overall goals at the time. It's a great counterbalance between how he grew up and what he faced and what he thought was plus ultra versus what at the core of it plus ultra really is.
And in that relationship between Henry and Rotwang, as we've discussed in previous chapters, really did evolve over the writing of the book. We do have a few alternate passages here from this chapter. Henry had assisted Rotwang in the construction of the apocalypse jumpers. How was it possible he hadn't picked them up on his scan? The suit's magnesium armor gleamed under the hangar lights as they circled him like a pack of hungry wolves. And then once Rotwang emerges, he says to Henry, "Remember how I always told you how I wanted nothing more than to put your mind at ease? I must admit, it disappointed me slightly you never got the joke. I thought I made you smarter than that. No matter, I am here to finally fulfill that promise." Really amping up the villainy here, the mustache twirling I thought I made you smarter than that? Woof. Those are harsh words, especially when he's in such a compromised position. This guy's a bad guy. I think I'm starting to realize Rotwang's a bad guy.
Yeah, and instead, I think what we got in this chapter, it speaks to a different kind of bad guy when it's I granted you new life, Henry, gave you what every boy wants, to be a Superman, to be transcended. This was always a loan, of course, but you should have cherished it. But no, you resented it, squandered it. I won't be making that same mistake. Even this late stage into it, Rotwang doesn't understand that he stole the soul and the consciousness and the mindset of a person who should have been dead, but wasn't. And instead was like, how are you not grateful for that in this body that I put you into and everything else? Because he's, again, only seeing this through the lens of, of what he wants.
And he does a little further jab even in that original version, which brings me to your first and last lesson in war. The doctor held the points of his device up close to Henry's face and traced the line of his cheekbone. Never brag about your best weapons, which is sort of an answer to the question, whoa, how am I not moving? Through the whole book, Henry's been able to drain all the devices around him, and suddenly he finds himself. And I love that that's being mythologized here, because this device is not necessarily showing up for the first time. It might be amped up, but this is the same thing, I believe, that Rotwang uses to install the heart at the beginning as well.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, just great stuff.
I caught that too.
Setups and payoffs. Beautiful. This is what we like to see.
I love the way it's written in the book with his history, like just kind of airing out, unable to recall.
Those great little file structures and the look from his perspective, that make the last few calls of his mechanical mentality fading out with his consciousness. Sad stuff. It's a grim, I mean, that's the other thing to say here at the end. The description of his flesh burning off and everything, it's grim. It's grueling. It's hard to read because they have fully humanized this character at this point. So to read that kind of pain, you absolutely believe, even though all the pieces are on the table for him to be rescued, perhaps, the thought of his demise is absolutely believable. That demise carries us into chapter 28, in which Rotwang considers his victory complete. Rotwang watches Henry burn. He remembers when he first conceived of the machine at a conference on Cartesian dualism. On a break at the gallery, he saw a French sculpture that represented a bird through movement rather than body. Like the birds he considered ugly, he preferred the HS1 this way and decided that he would not regrow the skin when he transferred his own consciousness into it. Now he need only to take the HS1 and his transfer equipment to the other side and shut off access to our miserable world. The visor of the jumper who torched Henry rises to reveal who else? Duquesne. Rotwang charges him with finding Clara and Lee, then heads to the control room to sabotage all but one plane for himself. Just as the Plus Ultra Zeppelin swoops into the hangar and decloaks, the Apocalypse jumpers attack, but they are taken out by the energy weapon of a Plus Ultra sniper. Rotwang makes one last dash to attempt to escape to the other world. Woo, okay. The heat is on, Hastin. We are starting, and to kick us off, we got some great art by Jonathan Case here. What do we got? What do we got on this one?
We've got a beautiful view of the hangar with a couple of those Plus Ultra planes and those really mechanical, what were they called?
The Apocalypse jumpers.
Yeah, the Apocalypse jumpers in view.
I love that we finally get to see one. That's the thing, is like, oh, it's such a unique sci-fi piece of tech. And up until the end here, they've been described, but we haven't seen them. So it was really cool to, even if it's small in the frame, have a little look at the Apocalypse jumper.
I'm relatively blown away that a Disney book got away with putting a swastika in it.
It does have precedent, particularly with, under the Disney banner now, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And more specifically to this, classically, they're all over Rocketeer. I think when they're so clearly, now that being said, Hastin, this was 10 years ago. I think there might be different discussions about that today.
I also really liked I feel like this is a total call out to the history of audio animatronics with the bronze cast of the bird in its movement, but not its body. Because as we famously know, Walt Disney's first big audio animatronic thing was the Enchanted Tiki Room, which they did a whole thing on how hard it was to create that sort of mechanical, create that mechanical view. And so I thought that was kind of maybe a fun little callback to, and then I love the idea of right afterwards, he realizes that he liked it better that way. And he decided it was how he was going to live the rest of his endless days. No skin, no bones, just that raw metal, just kind of cementing that whole like evilness.
You're bringing us right into fact versus fiction.
Facts.
This sculpture that he's looking at, I'm going to pronounce the name quite accurately. Les Cieux dans l'espace. That can't be right. It's fine. It's by Constantine Brancusi, and it's from 1941. And if you go look at it, I hope you'll consult the book to get the actual spelling. I apologize for my pronunciation. It just looks like a golden quill. You can probably read the plaque and determine, oh, yes, this might be the wingspan of an arcing bird going through flight. But also, just I'd like to take a moment to interpret this moment. Not that the sculpture isn't lovely, but his prognosticating about it, I would like to think represents that only the villain in this book is going to enjoy modern art on this level. It's a beautiful sculpture on its own, but I do think the lessons that Rotwang takes from it are bad enough that we can say, how good is the sculpture? But then again, bad people can interpret good art in bad ways. Maybe that's the ultimate lesson here. Bad people can always, doesn't matter how well intentioned you are, you can't control that bad people, no matter how much you think about the possible interpretations. When a Nazi mad scientist walks in, it doesn't matter what you thought your sculpture was saying. He's going to take it however he's going to take it. Less grim, I should think, is chapter 29, in which Amelia Earhart confronts her second death. Amelia loads rounds into her energy weapon and picks off the apocalypse jumpers from the pulsar gondola. A dozen Faustus units swarm one of the mechs. Chaos in the hangar. She drops down, surrounded by a protection squad of Faustus units. She instructs them to show the firing enemies some love. So the Faustus units hug the Nazis to immobilize them. Taking cover behind a fallen jumper, Amelia is strangled by the pilot inside, Duquesne. She is rescued by a silver automaton she doesn't recognize as Henry until Clara calls out for him to put Duquesne down. Henry obliges by throwing the mole across the hangar. Oh man, there's like 10 satisfying things that happen in a row here. I love this little bit.
I love the visual in my brain of the extremely positive Faustus units, the recruitment Faustus units, like just happily helping along with, like, it reminds me very much of like the Dave Clarks with all the big smiles, right?
Oh yeah, they're definitely the shadow, or I should say the Dave Clarks are the shadow version of the Faustus, right? And just imagining them swarming an apocalypse jumper, it's hilarious. It's not only action packed, it's really funny to imagine. And yeah, man, the Faustus units by this point, I mean, at the beginning of the book, you could not have imagined how endeared you would be to them. This is just really funny, great stuff. And then, of course, having the big moment where it's like, Henry didn't die, he's saving Amelia. It's just very satisfying. It's a very satisfying payoff for all this. At the end of the chapter, we end with a little joke because Clara says to put him down and he throws him. There's an alternate joke. In the final book, Henry says, you said to put him down, I put him down. Originally, he says, now that was a hard landing. So, they're workshopping the bits. They're workshopping the jokes. I do like that many of these chapters do seem to end with a little Law and Order style, punchline at the end of it, throwing us into the next one.
He remembered there was part of his dream that was not yet dead. He could still have that. He could still escape. He could be free. This is referring to Rotwang, of course. Classic villain thing, right? He got greedy. He didn't just go for Henry and try to get Henry's body and live forever. No, he also had to get to the other side. He had to get to Tomorrowland. He wanted that too.
Specifically so that he could deprive everyone else of it.
Right.
The idea of cutting it off from them, which, leads us to some real drama here, which we will find in chapter 30, in which Lee goes for an unexpected ride. Lee is distracted by Amelia's chokehold, then notices his mother has run off to grab Henry's power source and screw it back into his body. She points Henry to Amelia and he springs into action. The Plus Ultra leadership arrives and Hughes accuses Clara of being in cahoots with Henry as Tesla tends to Amelia. Einstein and Leo go to Henry as Lee finds a gun barrel pressed into his shoulder. Rotwang captures Lee and forces him onto one of the planes. Rotwang broadcasts Lee's screams to the hangar as a threat against anyone who would stop his escape.
There's a thing here where Lee is hurting, and he thought, I loved this, Lee thought of the doctor's mantra, good foot to heaven, bad foot to hell, right? And like how to move, because he destroyed his, and his mom did a version of this every day. He could do it too. All those little medical, those little medical things are so truthful in regards to, what doctors say. And I love that little bit. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was, at the time, advice that was, somebody had heard. I assume one of the writing staff had heard from a doctor. So that I thought that was fun.
You're right. It really takes what could be a kind of generic action beat and gives it a lot of character, makes it feel original. It imbues it with its own unique energy to have those kinds of details sprinkled throughout. And we're in the finale here, so this action is just propelling us from one chapter to another. Now we got chapter 31, in which Henry Stevens rides again, Long Island and the skies over the Atlantic. Hughes barks for Amelia to shoot down the plane. Clara pleads with him not to. Einstein comes to her defense. Henry watches the debate unfold and remembers what Clara had said to him when she replaced his core. A quote, "Never too late if Faust can repent," from Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. A robot can't change, but a human being can. Will you help me? Henry volunteers to go with Amelia in one of the Germans' faster planes to retrieve Lee. He gives them Rotwang's trident as insurance he won't try to betray them. Henry mounts himself to the top of a plane and they take off. Clara waves them away. Henry remembers his first flight with Amelia, realizing that her acknowledgement of his suggestion to name the other world Tomorrowland was her way of telling him the truth as much as she could at the time. He refiles the memory from a folder marked lies to a folder marked truth. Tesla radios them Rotwang's position. Henry hacks the radio system on the enemy plane and tells Lee to eject, but Lee was restrained, tied to his chair by Rotwang. Henry was going to have to board. As they approach the jump point over the grid, Henry leaps from one plane to the other. He punches through the cockpit glass and manually pulls the eject bar for Lee. His parachute deploys, and Amelia circles down to rescue him. Henry can see Tesla Tower on the other side of the portal, gazing at Tomorrowland for the first time, and likely he thinks his last. As they pass through the veil, he can hear Rotwang's laughter as they plunge. This is a very interesting moment as we get into this here, because it quickly becomes Henry's moment of sacrifice. And we think about the quote, "Robots can't change, but people can," which automatically, in concert with his sacrifice here, brings me to the final movements of the film with Athena. Athena ultimately proves that she is more than just what Frank accuses her of being, just a bunch of ones and zeros, by making an action that goes against the prediction of the giant world predicting machine that they're underneath, and making an independent choice, an enactment of free will against determinism. And that is what Henry is doing here. I love the close sort of structural parallels that start to emerge between the movie and the film here with Athena and Henry. And it's such a thrilling, exciting moment.
So I 100% agree that you have this great parallelism at the tail end of the film here as well. And I 100% see Athena and Frank, and also Henry and Amelia, because you get this, specific line of something flashed in Earhart's eyes, a recognition of someone she knew, someone that he still was or could be. Henry felt a flash, a drive, a feeling flickering inside. So again, you have a little bit of that, that flicker of understanding that they can't change. And I love the line, you said it, Tomorrowland really is a better name. In these last 3 chapters, you just had that turn on Henry to understand that he was part of something so special, and that at the core of it did care about him, and how this one really bad guy was really the only thing that made him hate these ideas and who these people were, and what they did. And I love the way that the view of Tomorrowland is described. The sky was tearing open ahead of them like curtains parting in the middle. An alien landscape revealed itself, vibrant with iridescent color. Rising above a rainforest with trees as tall as skyscrapers was a man-made structure, a lattice tower capped with a dome comprised of sparkling coils resembling a glowing ball of yarn. I love that description because, first of all, the curtains in the thing opening remind me of the end of the 64 or the World's Fair film, which, as we pointed out in a previous episode, we don't know is actually from the 64 World's Fair or not. It could have been from this fair.
I'm glad you brought this up, because between episodes, I've had a realization that I was 100% wrong about that, and you were 100% right. I called out a specific quote from that animation as defense, but that was actually a quote from the beginning of the animation. it absolutely is the 64 one, because what Wells said, I'm glad you've given me a chance to correct this, by the way. The thing he says at the end is actually,
and in just 20 short years, we will share this extraordinary place with the entire world.
that's from the position of 64 to 84 when the reveal was going to happen in 84. In 39, 20 years from then, what, 59? That means nothing. Like, that's not a date. So no. And obviously that was when we get a description of what the animation was at the exhibit in the salon. It's not the animation we see.
Yeah.
So no, I was wrong. Happy to cop to that. Glad to have an opportunity in this part 3 episode to clarify that. But yeah. All right, back to the view of Tomorrowland, which I'm glad you commented on, because it's complementary to what's in the film, but it very clearly is not describing the wheat field in the film. You know, it's describing some other landscapes. The idea that the things that Henry and Rotwang and in this story might be dealing with are different parts of the alternate world than the one that we see in the film. The earlier drafts give us a little bit of a glimpse into just how well written it is, because there's actually something that was excised that a lot of, I think, lesser writers would force themselves to include because it's a cheap trick. And that is, when they say you want to enhance your drama, you put a ticking clock on it. Often, literally, people would put a ticking clock. And in the earlier version, they had one. And I give them great credit for knowing that the drama of this particular chapter and all the things that happen are so potent that they actually didn't need a ticking clock. And so this was the original text when the Faustus units informed them that the Rotwang has locked them out of the grid. They originally said, I also regret to inform you that he has activated the grid, and worse, that this facility and the grid are scheduled to self-destruct in 24 minutes. And, you know, in a movie, you can see why it's compelling to have a ticking clock like that. But in a book, you're really more focused on the internal emotions. And the main thing about, you know, media like film, they're a fixed time thing, whereas books, you can read at any pace you want. You know, the ticking clock isn't necessarily this, unless you decide to do a countdown. Like, you can read in some books where they have a countdown in an attempt to replicate that. But I think this was a good edit, and it shows just how deftly they were considering the drama and how they understood, we've got enough here. We've got enough dramatic juice for the ending. The next 2 chapters are so intertwined, 32 and 33. We're going to take them right together, and then we'll talk about them both. Chapter 32, in which Rotwang transcends the other world. Rotwang glimpses the other side, knowing from the moment Henry jumped on his plane that it was all he'd ever see, deciding that would be all anyone would ever see. He pushed down on the yoke of the plane, driving the jet into the grid on the other side, his vision blurring as glass and fire flew against him. And then the other side of this particular moment, chapter 33, in which Amelia Earhart tries to say goodbye and fails. The skies over the Atlantic. A shockwave from the other side blasts Amelia's plane before the portal closes and the mushroom cloud on the other side disappears. The grid goes dark and sinks into the deep. Amelia locks the yoke of the plane and jumps, deploying her own parachute. Weighed down by her leather jacket once she's in the water, she bids it goodbye and inflates a portable life raft for Lee. She helps him inside, and he notices her jacket bobbing up on the water, coming back towards them. She sighs and says to it, I'll never have anything nice.
I love the duality of seeing the two sides of this big accident. I love how they've been to the other side, Tomorrowland, many times. They'll do it again. He's destroying the grid, but he's not destroying the dream or the idea or whatever else that will happen. But he's so caught up in this just, I have lost, I am going to destroy. In his last moment, he convinces himself that this last act is going to somehow do something, when the truth is that he has been 100% and fully, completely defeated by what, honestly, by an inspiring speech from a Faustus unit that kicked this whole thing off, you know, from a recruiter that told him that they were sorry for what happened to Plus Ultra, and that caused Henry to completely turn around and save himself and become important and become alive again and understand that these ideals are really important. It's a great ending to a evil villain character, you know, this just idea of like, no, I'm getting my last revenge. And it's like, are you really?
It is a folly of his villainy, because yes, Plus Ultra will be back. Plus Ultra has gone over there many times, but as we've seen through the course of the story, he was so focused on his particular branch of science. They were always talking about how Rotwang was not as interested in this stuff. Rotwang never was over there. He was curious why and where they got this unique material that he built the robot out of, but he had never gone over there. He didn't know about it. So I do think in his mind, even though this is his ultimate failure and he would not survive, I think he sees this as a major blow to Plus Ultra. And, for about 20-ish years, it is. As we'll find in the following chapters, the fallout of this is Plus Ultra not going to be as much on the main stage as it was. This is a big financial hit to them and a big resource hit because the ramifications of that broadcast equipment not being there are absolutely vast. But thankfully, we now know with the bad guy destroyed on the other side and the sad loss of one of our heroes that turned from villainy, all of our good guys pretty much made it out. And that's great with this little, the calm after the giant explosion. The idea of seeing a mushroom cloud and then just suddenly the curtain closes and it's calm and she floats down and they're just on this raft together. And you got this funny little moment with, my old jacket. They're never going to give me a new one now. It's just a moment of levity after, honestly, a couple of really intense chapters. And I deeply appreciated that levity.
Were there any changes from the ARC in these 2 chapters?
No, the funny thing is, now that we can look back over the long arc of this book, and sometimes literally the arc, it's this wedge where there were a lot more changes at the beginning that tapered out towards the end. I think just by the nature of storytelling, once you've outlined where your story concludes, there is, in any good story, and I count this one among them, an inevitability to what's going to happen. So I imagine that their earlier passes at this were just like, yeah, that's what needs to happen. Obviously, and as we discussed in the previous chapters, these little character moments where it's like we can hone in on what's in their heads. But no major kind of changes because this was just inevitably what they always wanted at the end. And I think that's always nice there's a comfort in knowing that. And that brings us to chapter 34, the last of part 3. Not the last of this limited series. We still have a couple more episodes to discuss the epilogue and then a big anniversary celebration to close us out at the end. But here we are at chapter 34, in which Lee listens to a stirring speech. Long Island. A Faustus tends to Lee's ankle on the deck of Einstein's beach house, Clara's arm over his shoulder. Amelia had warned them that they might want to get rest outside because the place was about to become a war zone. They overhear heated debate among the Plus Ultra leaders. Hughes demands that they rebuild and get back on schedule. With the grid and tower destroyed, their communication network was down entirely. The others try to talk sense into him. They are vulnerable, and Hitler is watching. Hughes storms out, and it is decided that Plus Ultra will cease all activities and deactivate remaining technologies until further notice. Amelia agrees to head up the efforts to protect their remaining secrets using their old base as an HQ. Einstein agrees to sign their fateful letter to the president. Filled with gratitude, Lee and Clara listen to Lou Gehrig's final speech on the radio.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. But I might have been given a bad break, but I've got an awful lot to live for. Thank you.
Clara takes a deep breath of salty air and responds with a smile, Amen. And isn't there something lovely, not counting the epilogue, about a Tomorrowland science fiction book ending with the line, Amen from Clara? She represents both sides of the equation here. What a great ending. What a fantastic little thing.
A bit of defeat, I think, a bit of sadness that you know deep down that Clara's grateful for what she got and what she got to see and the life that she got to live, but she never got to see Tomorrowland.
It was closed up. You're right.
She got to be part of this amazing thing for such a short period of time. There's part of me that's like, at the end of the day, the founders played it safe again, as we saw them do time and time and time again, right? The common thread here. Let's open this other dimension to the world. Well, it didn't work out. Now we've got the Nazis, now we've got the Cold War. Now we've got rising pessimism and the inability, the world is going to be destroyed. So why open it? Why share it with the world? They're just going to destroy it like they did this one. It's just this struggle that Plus Ultra faced every time, every single time.
And what you're saying actually makes me think, in a way, even though at the end of this journey, Rotwang does not reign supreme, in his own little way of destroying the grid, he kind of succeeds at something Nix was trying to do but didn't do, which is close off Tomorrowland. You know, that was one of Nick's ultimate goals there, and in his own small way, in his death, Rotwang did that. It's an interesting dynamic, because you're right, in the context of the story, and having experienced it fictionally, what their machinations are and all this, it is a sadness at the end here that Plus Ultra has to go away. But like zooming out on the storytelling level and the meta level of like, okay, we're doing this alternate history of Plus Ultra, and if you think we're dealing with this era of time, I'm sure a big challenge to the storytellers, both when they were discussing the original story for the film and this is, okay, if they were founded in 1888, what did they do during World War II? And I think it's a really clever way to say, why didn't Plus Ultra save us during World War II? Well, they weren't really active during World War II because of all these things that happened. They had a depletion of resources because of these events. It gives us an in-fiction way of understanding why weren't they helping us if this is this alternate world? Well, we all have our logistics to deal with. And I think it was, sad in the universe, but also in a storytelling way, a really clever way to deal with a shaky thing, which is alternate history. Everyone has to deal with World War II because it was just this cataclysmic human moment. And I think ultimately, this is a really interesting way to do it, specifically by ending with Einstein signing the letter.
There's a lot to pull out of here. You get a little bit of that nod when Amelia says, besides, somebody has to take care of you, and it isn't going to be your pigeons. A really awesome call out to, the last years of Tesla's life and the New Yorker, and also just, like you said, that relationship and that bond between the two of them that was extremely obvious in the ARC, and then in this version is a little bit more subtle.
Yeah.
Is pretty great. And, it's just, there's a lot of neat stuff. And I love the throwback to, I guess Dad was right, said Lee, about what? We weren't prepared for New York.
Not that rapscallion could have known just how unprepared they were. He was just thinking of a normal city. Boy, did they get swept up into something. Now, Hastin, if you're talking about Tesla's pigeons, I'm afraid you have pulled us kicking and screaming into fact versus fiction.
Good luck.
Not just Tesla, we got to talk about Einstein's dog, because there is a mention of a dog here. They describe this black dog, and heck, let's just also talk about the chapter art here, because it shows Einstein sitting with his hand on his chin, chaos is erupting around him, his dog is looking up at him peacefully, and you get this tableau of the other members. You've got Tesla pointing sternly, Hughes throwing his hand up, and Amelia just grimacing at this whole situation. Great piece of art. But the dog is both described and illustrated as a black dog. And when you look it up, Einstein famously had a dog, Chico, but he was a wire fox terrier and definitely not black. If there was a summer dog that Einstein had only at his summer home, I have yet to find this research. If anyone knows about Einstein's black dog, or perhaps this is simply a symbol, the black dog of death, I don't know. What do y'all think is going on with this dog? Because it doesn't seem like it's Chico. If it was Chico, I just feel like Jeff Jensen and Jonathan Case would have said, Chico was smiling. They would have given him a name drop, right? The other name drop we get from history once he signs the letter is, go give it to Sachs. Make sure he gives it a look over in his suggestions. This is real history. Alexander Sachs, economist, Roosevelt advisor, was the person who delivered the letter. And there was obviously a back and forth here talking about its contents, because it wouldn't be delivered till October. So we're in July here, and it's not delivered till October 1939. But yeah, just getting us that little bow on the end of, we're dragging in a piece of real history, which I think is an elegant way to sort of kind of sum up the things we were talking about with the state of where Plus Ultra is that we got this great story of a fictional society, but it's always going to be subservient to the real history. And so ending at a place that's kind of boosting up this real document as a key part of the drama, fantastic. And giving a fictional reason that played into his decision-making. Just a lot of great fun and real stuff. We do have one little change that speaks to what you were saying about Tesla and Amelia, and a great way to send us off here. When Tesla tells Amelia he'll understand if she still wants to go public and go live her life outside Plus Ultra and come back to the world. In the final version, she says, just when things are getting exciting, not a chance. Besides, someone's got to take care of you. Again, paralleling the Lee and Clara here. But in the arc, she says, Nikola Tesla, you better not be trying to break up with me. And then Tesla blushes. So there is something vindicating in that. I'm glad I didn't misremember this. It was sort of more blatant there. But hey, if we're dealing with a Tomorrowland narrative that deals with alternate universes, the advanced reader copy of Tomorrowland, Before Tomorrowland, is just an alternate universe version of the book. So it's one of those things where I don't know how many of those advanced reader copies are still flowing around. So I'm really glad that throughout these 3 parts, we have been able to call out some of the more interesting changes. Obviously, there's a ton of little tiny changes here and there, but being able to quote and document some of those changes that really do change the story into what it is. And ultimately, I think a much stronger story. I will say, I love this book more now than I did when we started this whole journey with Tomorrowland. When we first read it, I almost feel like, at least for me, I can't speak for you, but I was so blinded by the excitement of the universe and the movie and the film and the Optimist. I think I was reading the book through the lens of what can I learn about Plus Ultra? I don't know that I was as open at the time to receiving the journey of the characters as the prime core of this book. But now time changes everything. And those were the things that really shone the brightest for me. And it spoke to just how, even under personal stress and life circumstances, Jeff Jensen and Jonathan Case collaborated to create this really amazing sort of story that continues to resonate, just as we talk about with the movie. The movie has proven to be more prescient about our modern day than even they could have predicted when it came out 10 years ago. I didn't think that was going to be as true for the book, but man, oh man, is it. And not just in the ways that it connects to the film, in its own unique sort of ways. It's been a really satisfying thing.
And, I think that this is a case where I was in the same boat 10 years ago. It's like, reading it, it was like, I cared about the movie. I wanted to know about the movie and the movie characters and what Tomorrowland meant and whatever else. And, I got to admit, 10 years ago, it was like, I was a little disappointed at the end of the book because we didn't get to Tomorrowland. And it's funny because there's an element of that is a common aspect of this franchise and all the ways that we've experienced it. But I think what's really great is going back now and understanding, seeing just from the 10 years that this whole, Frank and Athena relationship and how that's portrayed on screen and how it's just kind of been in my mind, the number of times that I see it and the almost every time that, you kind of cry thinking about it. It's like, that's here in this book. And I did not pick up on that 10 years ago. And even after I did a cursory reread after the film came out, it still wasn't, in my mind. And it's like, we've also grown a lot over the last 10 years. And I think that our love of this has changed over the last 10 years. And I think that there's definitely a really much stronger appreciation that I have that we have it at all. And that it's so wonderful that there's this way to connect with these same ideas and themes and goals that the film does. And it just, for lack of a better thing, it's like it's sort of our personal, we never got a trilogy, but we kind of have our trilogy. We had The Optimist, we had the book, and we had the film. And it just, going back and rereading it reminds me like, no, this was an amazing, fully fledged story with so much of the lore and so much of the Plus Ultra that I loved through The Optimist and through the film. And it's still in there. And it's still, I love that it's just such a great, easy, casual read. Like, I'm definitely going to revisit it, every couple of years now because of how much, just like I revisit the film, because of how much I really got more out of it this time around. And then obviously, discussing it with you on the podcast here and like, kind of mulling it over a little bit has just been it's been really special. And it feels way more special now, I think, than it did 10 years ago for me. And I think that that's just, it's a delight that we have it. And it's amazing it got made. And I'm just so glad.
The only thing I can say to that is I'm going to take a nice salty breath in. I'm going to smile and I'm going to say, Amen. Hastin, if folks want to drop us a line about their own journey with Before Tomorrowland, where should they send it to?
Well, you can find us on Blue Sky or Instagram, that infamous Blue Sky team, or you can send us an email at press@tomorrowlandtimes.com. That's PRESS@tomorrowlandtimes.com.
And we'd like to thank everyone for visiting Tomorrowland Times, which we will keep alive as long as humanly possible to ensure that there is always a place where dreamers can stick together.
Amen.